Hey DCC, and welcome to another edition of Morning Coffee. That's awesome. All right, so um, I was talking the other day to somebody about all the different states that they had lived in, and so it got me, trying to calculate how many states I lived in before I turned 21. So before I ever met my wife, and when I finished up school and got married, and the count was 11. So we had Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Florida, a little stint in North Carolina and Atlanta, Alabama. I'll just count all those together. And then Montana, Iowa, and Minnesota. And then we got to talking about like all the different jobs that we had done. And so I listed them here, and I won't read in a comprehensive list, but this will be pretty big. A short order cook, Gaylord, Minnesota. A city engineer, Owatonna, Minnesota. I was assistant receiving manager at Home Depot at Knights in Minnesota. I was a cowboy ranch hand in Montana. I was a roofer, a masonry worker. I served many years as a software executive, sales executive, marketing executive, in different capacities. I was a senior pastor, as a youth and family pastor, involvement pastor. I was over 3 daycares and learning centers in South Twin Cities, Minnesota. I was a school-age child care director for the public school district in Owatonna. I've done welding and fabrication for a manufacturing company. I was a data analyst at a similar manufacturing company and a church planner, and I could go on and on. But so the question is, like, hopefully God had me learn something from all that, right? All those different states. And I just gave you the states that I lived in before I turned 21. Shara and my girls and I have lived in several states and actually even in Canada for a period of time. But I think one of the things that you learn when you travel and you live in different places is that, there's a lot of people who get ethnocentric. They think of they think of Colorado as the greatest place on earth and the mountains, and nothing matches it. But then, like for me, I've lived in Colorado, but I've also lived in Montana, and Montana's got beautiful mountains. And usually when you're looking at those mountains, there aren't 50,000 people at a national park standing with you looking at those mountains. And so there's differences, right? And but I found places like Iowa and Minnesota and Washington State all have beautiful things about them. There's, the Midwest gets a lot of criticism about, you go to Iowa and there's nothing but soybeans and corn, and everything like that. But there's beauty to me in that. There's beauty in farmers working with their hands and picking rock and working with implements and doing all those things. And so what did I learn from all that? I learned that, each state had its beauty, and each state had its culture. It had its type of people, and I found it to be amazing and fascinating, and I never was lacking for things to do. I wasn't bored. So I've lived in rural areas out in the country, and I've lived in cities and suburbs in big cities. And so for me, I just learned that each state had its own beauty, had its own, takeaways. And so I'm hard pressed to say which one I like more, or the most. Each one had things that I enjoyed and loved about it. And then secondly, the learning that people are very similar and somewhat very different in some capacities, right? And because you can kind of get to different people through different ways, right? When I was in manufacturing and construction, and the difference between the farmers that I picked rock for and planted plots of soybeans for in Iowa were very similar to the cowboys and ranch hands that were in Montana, right? They were blue collar, they were hardworking, they got up early, they worked all day, they could work 12-hour days, blisters on their hands. They kind of worked till it got done, right? Like you didn't get a, hey, I cut off at 5 in Montana. We cut off when the job got done because we had stuff to do the next day. And so, I think there's this beauty of these people who are hard workers. But I also worked in corporate America. I worked in offices and cubicles and business buildings, and saw people working on computers and with technology, and so when you're with them, they're just as hardworking, and they just have a different things that they're doing, right? And so to me, like there's so many similarities between people. Everyone's got their culture. I had Rebecca. When I first met her, her name was Rebecca Rishu. She now married Ben Quinn, and she's Rebecca Quinn. But she was a raging Cajun from Cutoff, Louisiana. But she was amazing at all the different jobs that she worked for me for a software company of all places, right? And you meet people like Bruce Mathis, a cattle boss out on Dragon Y Ranch, and I remember dreading at about 4:30, 4:45 in the morning. I'd hear his spurs coming towards our bunkhouse, which meant it was time to get up because we needed to get the coffee started and we were going to eat breakfast. And so, and Bruce, right? I mean, like, I think he, would always be biting off a big, huge chunk of Levi Garrett or something and starting his day, and he's always in a good mood, always had a smile on his face, and was just a practical joker. But people are beautiful. People are wonderful, and I've met some of my dearest friends in all of those different communities, rural, city, executives in companies to blue collar workers, and to me, people are just beautiful. And so, I guess if I were to give you 3 takeaways that I think tie into church and to God and how He sees the world, I would say that it takes all kinds of kinds. I stole that from a song title, but it takes all kinds of kinds, right? I mean, when we want to reach people and we want to chase after hearts, there's just people that you can reach and you can touch and you have rapport with that I'm not going to have. And you're going to be able to build relationships and talk to people and have opportunities that I'm never going to have. And so how we build this thing called church and how we build this thing called community and trust and share is that we need you, and we need people that are opposite of you. We need people that are completely diverse, and we need all these people so that we can just, thrive. And that's the beauty of the church that God made, right? You start out with these fishermen from Galilee, then you throw in a tax collector here, you throw in a zealot. Over here, you've got Paul that comes in, kind of a Pharisee of Pharisees, and now he and Peter are gonna bring in the Gentiles. You see, Peter meets Cornelius, and all of a sudden, he's now starting to share the gospel with non-Jews. And then, as we look at history, we think of places that aren't in Israel, that aren't part of that are way up in Turkey and other places like Bithynia, Bithynia, and Priene, and all these different places where we can go back and through archaeology see that there was a strong component of the church there and it thrived, and yet it was a completely Gentile, non-Jewish group, and yet it all worked and it all came together. And Paul and Peter and others, worked in these cities that were far away from God and yet built these communities of people who are greatly diverse. They were rich, right? When you go through the book of Acts, you're going to find Lydia. She was a seller of purple. She was a businesswoman. She was very, very wealthy and very influential. And then you're going to find, Paul is going to address, a slave, a servant, and he addresses him and he talks about what it's like to work in the household of a Christian, and yet you're kind of have this slavery going on. And so there are just huge diversity in the church, and it's beautiful because it's like this melting pot of people and personalities and upbringings and differences, and yet we're all one in Christ. And so it takes all kinds to make up the church. We're not just one brand. We're not just going to be one type of DNA. We're going to come from all different walks, all different points of life, and come together. The other thing I think I learned across all that is hard work transfers, and no matter what, right? When I was in Montana, Bruce Mathis got up before everybody else, and he probably went to bed after everybody else, and he worked just harder than we did to set the pace for us. But as I became a leader and started leading in corporate, that was something that I wanted to be said of me. So I love showing up when it's dark and leaving when it's dark. And there's just something about me setting a pace so that when people look at me, they know that I'm not asking anything more of them than I'm asking of myself. And so if I'm willing to put in the time and put in the dedication, then they should be willing to do so. And I should never be able to ask them to put in the time if I'm not willing to put in the time. And I shouldn't ask more of them than I'm asking of myself. And so I think hard work transfers. And, Jesus throughout the scriptures is constantly commending people who are working. You think of the parable, where Jesus is comparing all the workers, right? The master goes away and he entrusts these three individuals. The one who actually worked hard and made a difference and added to what was given to him is the one that's most highly commended, right? And the guy who just buried it in the ground and really didn't do anything, he's not in such a great spot with the master, right? And you see that throughout the scriptures, that there's hard work and effort. God doesn't want you to remain static. You think of Paul's illustrations. I run this race so that I may win the prize, right? I am striving. I am beating my body. I am doing everything I can. And of course, he's talking about the Christian walk and the walk of faith. And so hard work transfers. And the last thing that I think is probably the most evident of all the places I've lived and all the places I've worked is that everyone needs love. And I know that's a simple statement, and sometimes we throw around that word love, but man, there are people who are going through challenges, and there's wealthy people, there's poor people, there's blue-collar workers, there's corporate executives, and yet all of them have this God-shaped hole in their heart, and the only thing that can fill it is God. And you and I have an opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus to them. And so in a sense, we get to kind of put God in that hole, right? We get to help God and the Holy Spirit, participating with them to help impact other people. So I hope that you can take some joy in the diversity that is in our church, and take some joy in the diversity that you get to see, that's completely different than the world that I get to see sometimes. And today, make an effort to find people, because you know what? Acknowledge that they're hardworking. Acknowledge that it takes diversity, so they're not going to be just like you, but you still love them, and realize everyone needs love. And if you can just focus in today and try to love people and commend them for their hard effort, and embrace diversity, because diversity is beautiful and it's part of the church, and it's how God intended the church to be. All right, have a good day.